Hello, my name is Buddy Childress, and I'm Executive Director of Needle's Eye Ministries. We are really happy to have you with us today for our monthly speaker series. We hope you enjoy it.
Well, I actually wasn't going to tell you about Lynchburg today, but since Buddy brought it up, I guess I will. You know, a lot of you just think just because I'm from Lynchburg, I'm probably a backwoods redneck hillbilly. But au contraire. In fact, when I was growing up there, I consider myself a Bible scholar, and I noticed how Jesus loved the water. You know, he walked on the water, and he'd be in the boat with the disciples, and the seas would kick up, and it, just at the command of his voice, calm everything right down. The apostles would be in the boat, they'd be fishing. They couldn't catch any fish, and he'd say, just throw your net on the other side of the water, and they'd reel in hundreds of fish. I thought, wow, Jesus, he really loves the water. So we lived growing up in Lynchburg. I went to my mom and dad, and I said, Mom and Dad, we live up here where it's high and hilly. If we're going to get to know Jesus, I think we're going to need to move to Virginia Beach. But anyway, I am from Lynchburg. Before I get started, I'm going to tell you one thing. I am going to talk about some personal problems today. I'm not going to go into tremendous depth, but just for argument's sake, know that it's a whole lot worse than what I'm going to get on with today. And just, if you can take what I'm saying, the bad parts, multiply it by 100, that's where I am. So I'm going to talk about some darkness that enveloped my life and how God gave me the keys to answer those prayers. And then how I took action to realize His grace and His peace. In only 20 minutes, I won't be able to cover all the great things God's doing in my life. You will hear me say, I and me in these stories, but I really take no credit. These are God's stories. It is important to note, to listen to how I learned to acknowledge Jesus in all my good deeds. In the Needle's Eye newsletter, you probably saw that I described myself as a couch potato Christian. Well, that's basically what it was, literally. And I was laying on the sofa on Sunday mornings, and I was watching TV church. And just going through the remote, and I originally started watching John Hagee, and John Hagee had me convinced pretty quickly I was going straight to hell, so I stopped watching him. So the rest of my life after Sunday morning church on the sofa was just doing exactly what I wanted to do. In other words, it was 99.9% selfish. I was literally and figuratively a couch potato Christian, and that was going to change, and really soon. I need to rewind the tape for a few years and talk to you about my oldest daughter. Her name's Kelly. She's now 20. She was a really sweet kid, always, anxious to please. She was an incredible athlete. She was college-bound to play soccer. She was being recruited by several schools. She made excellent grades. In the summer of 2006, one night Kelly came to Vicki and I in the bedroom, and took her a long time to say it. She had a lot of angst, and then she finally just said, I've been using drugs and I think I need help. Well, as you can understand, as parents knowing nothing about that, you get turned upside down on your head. We didn't know where to turn, who to ask questions. We knew nothing. So we finally got her, a couple days later, we got her to a drug counselor, and he confirmed that she did have a problem. And on 1 hour sleep, Kelly and I headed to Nashville, and I took her to a residential rehab at the ripe age of 17. That was the summer between her 11th and 12th grade years. Kelly was there for 35 days. Her senior year, she had to be homeschooled. She couldn't go back to Freeman. She had to say goodbye to all the friends and to change the people's places and things. She had to quit playing soccer. And at the age of 18, she had just turned 19. She was still she was 18, I'm sorry. She was still a senior in high school. She moved to a women's recovery house to help facilitate her recovery. Well, as you can imagine, this just about killed Vicki and me. Things went reasonably well for about the next year, and I'm going to fast forward to February of 2008, just a year and a half ago. Kelly came to me and she said, Dad, I'm now 19 and I'm living this recovery lifestyle. It's 7 days a week. I have no friends, and this is not a great lifestyle, and I need something else. So I said, here's what we'll do, Kelly. We're going to find you a church that has a good youth presence. But I had no clue how to do that. So I wrote Kelly a long letter, and I said that we would help find her a church, and that when she got comfortable with this church, that I would back out and it would become her church. And I sent her that email. And then Saturday night, a couple days later, my wife and I are having dinner at U-Crops. And I was telling Vicki about the email that I sent to Kelly. At the end of my story, I got a tap on the shoulder from a complete stranger. And she goes, I didn't want to be nosy, but I have a church I want to suggest for you. And she suggested a church, and I said, the church is not for me, it's for one of my kids. And she says, I have another church for you. So she ended up recommending Commonwealth Chapel, And that tap on the shoulder from a lady named Mary Cox would change my life. The first time I visited Commonwealth Chapel is the day I say that Jesus sent the Holy Spirit. I woke up and I decided to go to church, actually go to church that day, but Kelly couldn't go, and I wanted to check out Commonwealth Chapel, so I went alone. Just by simply, and it's just this simple, by stepping across the threshold, the Holy Spirit, as I say, just really jumped on my back. It was, I joke, I say he jumped on my back and started riding me like a stick pony, or had me by the headlock and was doing one of these, but was not going to let go. It was an immediate change physically, spiritually, and emotionally, and I could feel this in my body. One example, I had never listened to Christian music in my life, and I'll say honestly, I didn't even like it. I left church that day, and I went straight to my car and started fumbling for Christian music. And I immediately started attending church twice a week. You see, it was actually me that God was delivering, not Kelly. Addiction is classified as a progressive disease of the brain. Synonyms for progressive are accelerating and escalating, and all by itself, without any help, addiction wants to consume. You'll never meet a drug addict or an alcoholic that just got better in a snap, or that got a lot better before it got a lot worse. After about 1 month starting Commonwealth Chapel, we found that this was the case with Kelly. On a Friday afternoon in mid-March, we learned of a very serious, and what I really call a grave relapse. Again, more darkness had arrived. Well, the center of my Christian universe was just about to take a major shift. That Sunday in church, just a day and a half after I got that really bad news, and I was a wreck. You know, the music started playing, I just was bawling. You know, I just begged God to take that burden off me because I just literally couldn't bear it. And I said, you know, God, can't you see how broken this father is? And then I knelt at the altar and I just prayed, and Pastor Don Coleman came up and he laid a hand on me and prayed with me, and the tears were just, you know, shooting that way. Matthew chapter 11 says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You know, God, he really wants us to trust him with our burdens. And he wouldn't desert me. He would answer my cries. 1 John chapter 5, "Now this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us." The very next day, 24 hours later, I'm at the U-Crops at Gate and Crossing, and I'm by myself, and I'm really depressed. I hadn't slept the night before, and we're suffering through a tragedy at our house. And I see these two women, they're having lunch, and one lady's crying, and the other lady's holding her hands. And I mean, I knew instantly what God wanted me to do. There was never a doubt what my role was. And I was really nervous because my new walk is only 1 month old. And I'd never walked up to somebody in public and offered to pray for them. So I walked over, you know, I finished eating my lunch, I looked over and I thought, doggone it, they're still there. You know, can't you eat just faster once, you know? So I walk over and, you know, I bend over and I realize that my rear end's now hanging on the table behind me. And the place was packed, and I said, you know, I don't want to be nosy, but can I offer to pray with you? And the lady who was not crying looked up at me and said, "This is my friend, and she has just accepted Jesus Christ into her life." And the lady who's crying looked up at me and said, "Of all days that God would send a complete stranger to my table, I know he's already working for me in my life." I mean, you can hear just the power of this. But, you know, you see, that's how God works. You know, I asked for his help and he gave it to me. You know, what he was teaching me that day was to redirect my focus. You know, instead of focusing inwardly on, you know, Lord, I'm